show you how to create some really dreamy landscapes really quickly in a sketchbook. I'm just using 4 colours plus white to create my palette. And apart from this bit, which is speeded up because it's kind of colour mixing, the rest of this video is all real time to show you how quickly, intuitively and expressively you can paint some wonderful landscapes. So now I've got the colour palette ready, let's get painting. I really love using really blunt and thick drawing tools. These Stabilo woody pencils are great. They're also water soluble. You could use charcoal or any other kind of thicker drawing pencils or markers because they stop you being too precise with your drawing technique. And this is real time, so this is as fast as I'm actually drawing. This is not speeded up. Although they're real places, these are from memory from Wales that I visited a couple of weeks ago, and I'm purposefully not using a photograph because I don't want to keep referring back to detail. I just want to make these drawings really loose and bold, and the marks really are just placeholders for the paint that's going to come later. Now I'm going to activate some of the woody pencil, and it runs like watercolour, just to give myself a little bit of tone under the painting that's going to come next, and just to get rid of that white blank page staring back at me. And it's going to pop through the paint, so it's really useful to have this under. And I'm just lifting a little bit of the bluer watery sky colour here, and I plop it down onto that other page. So it's really, really pale and loose, but it just helps me visualise where I'm going to come in next. And the first colour I'm going to come in with is a kind of sea foamy sort of colour. It's not entirely accurate on screen. It's a bit greener in real life, but it's a really lovely light colour, and I think I was drawn to that, going light and dark in extreme first, because the tones really help me set aside the composition and understand my own composition. So I tend to go in with the lighter and the darker things first rather than going in with the mid-tones. You can see I'm swapping up the brushes as well. So I always use a flat, very rarely use a pointed brush. I do like a dagger or a sword liner as well, but swapping up the brushes and the strokes just helps me keep it loose and expressive, so I'm not painting inside the lines. I'm actually making quite painterly marks. And I'm bringing in these warmer tones along with the blues and the sort of deeper blues that I've mixed, because I want things to pop from one another, and the blue and the warm orange are complementary on the colour wheel, so they sit opposite one another, so they pop and cause this really lovely vibrancy. And now I'm using a really big brush, so I'm going in with some of those marks and edges. Flat brushes are great for helping you make edge, mark, shape, rather than necessarily fidgety detail. You can just be really bold with them as well. And here I'm thinking about where the light is coming in on this rocky outcrop. So one side is going to be darker, one side is going to be warmer and lighter. And I'm just starting to bring the eye in around this green to show that actually it's attached to the coastline, and give an idea that, you know, we've got stuff growing and going on here. As I come in to fill in some of the sea, you'll see that I start to turn my brush, there we go, because first of all I start going vertically, which I don't really like a lot of sea and water to be vertical like that. So now I've gone horizontal. It makes a lot more visual sense. Your eye will follow the brush marks that are made. And I'm breaking it up here by adding these just really bold and flat, cubist almost sort of marks and shapes for the sky. Nothing has to be perfect. This is all sketchbooking. Adding some warmth in there as well, just to bring the horizon into the landscape, and putting in some of that hot pink. The sky doesn't have to be blue. And there I go, bringing it through and bringing some of that pink through to the landscape as well. I love it when the sky and the land are in harmony with each other in a painting. This is the actual speed I'm painting at as well. So you can see I'm not fidgeting around and getting really into the tiny detail, and I'm really just going for it, and I'm leaving marks. You can see those 2 marks then, just leaving them as they land on the page rather than over and over and over painting. I'm using a dagger brush here, and I like to use it sideways because it just gives really lovely jumpy shape. It doesn't necessarily paint everything in, which I really like to see that white sparkle of the page. When I go off screen like this, it's usually because I'm cleaning my brushes or maybe just searching around for something else. Oh, there we go. I'm adding some extra white to my palette. So remember, acrylics will dry darker. So always more white, always more white. And on this side at the moment, a lot of things felt quite mid-tone. So that's why I'm going back over with some white that's picking up some of the wet beneath, which I don't mind. But I'm just trying to give it a bit more contrast tonally. So not everything is sitting in that mid-tone range. And I'm going to go back in and just brighten up the sky on this left-hand side as well. I'm bringing some of the blues from the further down in the water and in the cliffs. Again, that harmony between sky and landscape is just dreamy. Absolutely love it. There I go with that dagger brush again. So a dagger or a sword liner is kind of like a wedge or a pointed shape, like an asymmetric arrow. And they're great for making thin, long lines and detail, but I like to use them in different ways as well. So I like to use them on their edge. And then here I go with this big impasto brush. Whoops, a little dribble there, turn it into some sea, don't mind that. Sketchbooking, this is what happens, and this is why it's great to experiment and just let anything happen and see how you can incorporate it into your work. And I need here to make the darker edges of this outcrop sing a little bit more. It really needs a bit of shape and definition to make it feel like a 3D object on the paper, and at the moment it doesn't feel that way. So I'm going to go in and lighten off on the right hand side where the sunlight's hitting it, and darken off on the left hand side of the rocky outcrop where there's the shadow, where it's in shadow. And I love that one line of pink there. That's the pathway out to the rock. I love pathways and leading eye shapes. So on this one on the left that I'm painting now, the water line is almost a pathway. And what they do is really draw your eye through the painting. And to me, that's a really powerful device for people to fall into the painting and really explore it visually. Softening up that horizon line now, I really want this to feel dreamy and summery and hazy. So I really didn't want on this one on the right hand side to have a really hard edge. I want things to disappear into one another a little bit more here, like the sea and the sky to feel hazy and of one another. I think that's a really lovely thing, and softness can really make a painting feel quite dreamy and expressive. But when softness works best, it's usually because there's a contrast there with some harder edges and some sharper marks as well. If everything is soft, then obviously you can't really see that everything is soft because there's nothing to compare it against. So bear that in mind if you're painting in a dreamier or softer style. You've noticed now I've switched up with this little brush, and that's just helping me make some changes to my marks, and I'm using it to scribble there as well as to make marks, and it just kind of keeps you loose and stops you from falling into the same shapes and repeating the same shape across the painting. I'm also using some of the green gold that I mixed and just adding that in to connect a sense of landscape, particularly more on the rocky outcrop one on the right. More of a landscape feel, as though there is earth and grass and things growing there, and it's not so just a beach scene. But I also added it to the one on the left, which is more of a beach cliff scene, because on the day I remember this vivid green algae and seaweed that was all over the rocks. So it's really nice just to bring some of that living energy, that living green magic into the painting as well. I'm doing a similar thing with the pinks here. I'm bringing the warmth forward. So warmer things come closer to us and cooler things will recede. So it's a great way to bring the foreground to us. And a tiny bit of spattering with some white paint. I didn't do too much, but particularly on the beach scene on the left, it really added just a little bit of interest. And then here I go with my fingers. So just going in with a phthalo and doing some shading here of the sea. When it's still wet underneath as well, what works great with your fingers is that you get this soft, dreamy, hazy feel, and that's what I was going for on the painting on this side. So I'm just trying to line up the horizon there, because the composition, if there was no sea on the very right of this rocky outcrop, that tiny little bit of blue that peeps through gives it context and shape and leads your eye through. I think if it just disappeared off the edge, it would have been too much. So I'm using some white and I'm just blending through and giving it that really sort of soft quality. So don't be afraid to get stuck in and use your fingers. It's a lot of fun. I know I keep saying it, but also don't forget this is real time. I'm really going that fast. So I am quite a fast painter. I am kind of lacking in patience. But I think what's great is that you can be more expressive and trust where you're putting shapes and marks and leave them, rather than really pouring over it and going so slowly perhaps that you just get caught up in the tiny amounts of detail. And fingers are not great for detail anyway, are they? You know, you kind of have to go with the shapes that land and enjoy it for what it is. And that's the trick of expressive, intuitive, quick and loose painting. And you can always come back in, like I am here, with a smaller brush and just add some little pops. So I still need some definition on the side here that's being hit by the sun. It doesn't just exist on its own, otherwise it's just a kind of light blob on the painting. And skipping back over now and just adding in some darker darks. Again, just thinking about the sun coming from the right, really. Although the dark of these, some cases, is the actual dark slate colour of the cliffs themselves. They're really lovely, dark greys and charcoaly blacks. And just also adding a hint of something there to the horizon, because this one is different in the fact that it does have something on the horizon line, even though it just disappears as the sea kind of breaks through. So again, I'm going in with my finger, and what's great about finger painting with water and with sky is you get these really organic shapes. So look, I'm rubbing in there, and I'm not rubbing too much, but just one or two touches, and you have tumbling surf, tumbling white foam on a wave. Really simple to do. And this is the stage where you keep looking and you keep thinking about what you want to do next. You've got some really good work down, and it's important to make some key decisions here about what to do next, so that you don't either go over what you've already done and lose something, or you add too much. And I just love this pink paint just coming through, some finger shapes here, just some warmth in the sky, just really fun, just really imaginative. And it works so well because I had the white underneath. Obviously, if I'd have gone pink over the blue, it would have kind of gone more lilac-y, or the peachy orange over the blue would have gone greener as well. So just consider the layers that you're building up. And I want to put some white back on that horizon line there, because I want it to feel as though the sea is continuing out past that rocky outcrop or that cliff in the far distance. At this point, I'm going to let it dry. And now it's dry, I'm going to come back in and I'm going to use some Posca acrylic markers. And I love to do mark making and calligraphy and scribing, I'm starting to call it, on top of my paintings. And I don't draw everything in tiny detail. You can see from how quickly and how loosely I'm holding the pen. Look, I'm holding it right at the very end. That I let it skip, and I sometimes follow shapes and colour, sometimes go outside of the colour, but it gives a really lovely finish and points for your eye to skip into and to see. But you do have to know when to finish with this, because if you go too much, you're suddenly like, that's way too much, and it looks as though it's, you know, a pen drawing that I've coloured in. So it's still about keeping it loose and fresh. So it's all about not drawing so much as scribing, calligraphy, symbols, shape. It's kind of still painting, but with an acrylic marker instead of actual paint on a brush. And I think at this point I do add a couple of marks that I'm not majorly happy with, and I kind of rub them out a little, but I've still got some wet paint, so I can come back in over those. And I'm also going to go in now with my white marker. And I love white marker because you can add in these fine little glimmers and sparkles, particularly on things like water or sky or little highlights, and they just add like a pop of something when you've got a little bit of white. And I want to show that water just kind of blooming and flowing through those rocks there, and what better way to do it than with white marker pen. Just the same as the black pen, you need to know when to stop, when enough is enough. And thinking about where the light and the shadows are going to be is still important, even if you're using a pen. So I'm putting in here just a little bit of white movement of water, and the white works really well against that phthalo blue, because obviously it's quite a deep blue, so you can really see it. And in real life, you can see the white marker pen more than you can perhaps here on screen. But yes, know when to put it down, and know when enough is enough, and you've got enough definition there, because you don't want it to feel overdrawn or overpainted. I'm going to come in with a little bit of more paint that I had, just to cover up, not cover up, but to kind of soften off some of the marks that I didn't like, but also to lighten that edge. I still really like the idea of it being really sunny and having that difference between the light and the shadow. So you can see I'm just finger painting. There's not really much technique here. The technique, I guess, is in knowing the shape and the place to put the lighter tones and the darker tones, rather than the actual use of the finger is not particularly technical. Oh, there I go. I've changed the shape of my finger by using my little finger. So there is a technique you can use, but it's still very loose and very expressive. A final bit of shadow here and definition coming in with just some of that blue, just to give it a pop. There is still going to be shadows on the side where the sun is hitting. So it's really important to not just make it a big homogeneous pale area, because there's still texture and still interest, visual interest there. Just softening off that edge, that tip, and just going to go in and add some more white, and you can use the edge of your finger to pull across as well as to dab, and it works really well for things like highlights and water and waves. It's kind of like using the dagger brush that I was talking about earlier on. And there's so much about these paintings that I love, that, you know, they have my fingerprints in them, that they're a mixture of really dreamy, magical colours that come from a simple colour palette that I've created myself, that they're from memory and imagination. They are my interpretation of the landscapes I was looking at. Nowhere did they have bright pink on them, but they are my versions, and that's what's magical about them. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and let's look at the final work. It's been so wonderful to share these real-time paintings with you, so come back for more, and I'll see you soon.